Hello, hello. How are you? Yes? Awake? Good. So, AI. So, the inspiration for this talk, the title for this talk, comes from a familiar AI voice that is normally in my headphones when my headphones disconnect from my phone. And it says, lost connection, lost connection. And me being a mere human, I was like, I'm going to ignore that. I know better. But then I thought, well, actually, maybe my phone, my headset, has finally gained AI consciousness and it is giving me the title for this talk. Yes. But I still was like, maybe. On this occasion, I decided to listen and really understand and try and think about what does this idea of lost connection really mean. So now, we're a group of people in a room pondering the thought of AI consciousness while reveling in the fact that we are superior humans. So, what I'm going to do in the next 10, 15 minutes is really explore this idea of lost connection in how it relates to us and our relationship with AI and technology. To navigate this impact, what we really need to do is we need to hold a mirror up to ourselves first. We need to be honest about the fact that what we're doing is we have a relationship. We are the ones that are creating this. That we need to recognize that when we talk about this age of discontent, we're the ones that are creating it. We seem to forget that what we are creating is creating us. And we have a level of responsibility and power that we really need to take seriously. To really navigate this, we need, as I said, we really need to embrace this understanding of openness and honesty and looking at the roots of where technologies come from, where this idea of artificial intelligence really stems from. We end up in this place, and instead of assigning blame to the fact that technology is not working properly, what we need to do is look at accountability. We need to acknowledge, as I said, that we have a role and responsibility in this. So this realization takes us to a place that actually where we are right now is we are in a thought experiment of our own creation. We're in this world that we need to move beyond the philosophical, the psychological, and we really need to act. We need to take action now, rather than just talking about the ideas, the idea of being a futurist. We've heard some great talks today that give you some ideas and some examples of what can be done. But I'm going to share 2 provocations with you that I hope that really get you to think differently. Because regardless of the job titles that I have, that's what I do. I try to get people to think differently. And I always start with one quote, which is, the purpose of a storyteller is not to tell you how to think, but to give you questions to think upon. That's what I'm going to do. I don't have the answers. I don't have some crystal ball that is going to tell you what's right to do. But what I really want to do is get you to think differently, to really understand what you're doing and why. So, in this current post-pandemic tipping point for climate change, this era when we have economic instability, something that I call the ecological triptych, we really need to recognize that we're actually at a really crucial point, a historical inflection point in time. That we now have the responsibility and the opportunity to make a difference, to make a change. And what we need to do is we really need to recognize that we have a way of changing the way that we see the future. So, as we contemplate this idea of this ecological triptych, we need to understand what AI actually is. It goes beyond replicating humans, replicating what we do. It goes beyond enhancing and augmenting human capabilities. It's a form of interconnected networks, interconnected relationships that help us to make decisions, to grow and share knowledge, and the potential for innovation. Does that sound familiar? Interconnected relationship that help us make decisions. Well, it's similar to mycelium networks. It's also similar to our nervous system. that regulates vital organs, how we breathe, how our heart rate operates. Without this, without conscious thought, we've got to a stage where AI is involved in everything that we are and everything that we do. And we seem to have this idea of separating it out. I'm asking you to think about it in terms of an interconnected network that actually also has a connection with our relationship with climate change and the climate crisis. Traditional ecological knowledge is what Indigenous people have. It's the center of their being, of the way that they are. And it offers an invaluable insight into how we can look at our relationship with artificial intelligence. Traditional ecological knowledge is really about this interconnected relationship with all that is other. Remember at the beginning I said that, AI is gaining consciousness and being mere humans that overrides. We have this idea that we are superior to everything else. And it really reminds me of one of my favorite quotes, which is from a beautiful book. If you haven't read it, I suggest you read it. The book is called The Spell of the Sensuous by David Abraham. And I remember I was in the countryside with some friends and I read this line and it changed everything for me. It made me stop. It made me get up and go, you need to listen. The line is, we are human only in contact and conviviality with that which is not human. We only understand our humanness because we put it in opposition to everything else. We end up in this line of superiority where we believe that we are superior, we are the ones that can change everything. Where does that come from? 18th century French philosopher René Descartes said that we must be the masters and possessors of nature. We must be the masters and possessors of everything that is other. And many of our systems, our structures, the way that we operate has been built upon that foundation. And that's why we end up in this place where we are now. So this leads me to a provocation. How can we change our biases, those biases that are embedded in our systems and structures? So we really need to confront this. So 2 weeks ago, I was speaking at Venture Fest Northeast in Newcastle, and I met an amazing professor who blew my mind, Dr. Noura Al-Mubayed. She is a computer scientist from Durham University. And her presentation stopped me in my tracks because she talked about the fact that many of our language models, our AI systems, are actually built on platforms, on processes that are 20 or 30 years old. So think about that. When we're adding and we're building and we're using ChatGPT, many of these platforms are built on old legacy models that still have the mentality, the idea, the perceptions and the views of 20 or 30 years ago. So we're in a time, one of the provocations that she shared is that she started to talk about this toxicity score that is in AI platforms and systems. That when you mention mental health, many of the systems flag that up as derogatory language and then leads to all sorts of other things. As chair of Mental Health First Aid England, we are in a time when more and more people are talking about their mental health and well-being. They are talking openly about it. If many of our AI systems are still using data and perceptions and views that are 20 or 30 years old, she worries that what it's going to do is it's going to put us back in the cupboard. It's going to move things back 20 or 30 years. So, what can you do? What are some of the things that you can do right now? Well, question binary thinking. We heard earlier, is AI a tool or this? Why does it have to be either or? We spend a lot of time in this binary world. If we're thinking about how we really look at these things, we need to really challenge the binary. It could be both. It could be all of these things. If we are going to look at this, having this idea of an interconnected world, we need to recognize that what we are is connected with everything. We need to move away from the idea of binary and start to look at the symbiotic relationship that we as humans have with everything else. A resource for you. Has anyone seen this website before? No? Ask Nature. It's one of the websites that I use most of the time because what it does is it helps you to find sources of information. I was given a talk with a blockchain organization, and they wanted to talk about social media. Where do we find the best relationships for social media? Where do we find the best relationships for social interaction? Went to this website. Guess what forms the best social interactions, the best social relationships? Bacteria. It's a great way of stepping outside of our comfort zones and finding information that we can use to look at, to try and understand what we're doing. Another one, I recommend that you read this paper, Indigenous AI. It talks about how we have this interconnected relationship and understand the indigenous approach, this interconnected approach to understanding our relationship with artificial intelligence. We also need to think about how we amplify alternative narratives, alternative stories. We tend to tell the same stories over and over again. This was an artist residency at the Buckminster Fuller Institute that I was a part of a couple of years ago. They brought together artists, technologists around the world to really think about how can we use artificial intelligence, technology, the metaverse, to create art that helps people go on the journey, to amplify these different narratives and these different ways of being. We also need to think about how we bring psychology into all of this. This is the College of Extraordinary Experiences, a great place in Poland. What they do is they bring together designers, experienced designers, technologists, artists, creators from around the world. You spend a week in this castle running around like Harry Potter, but you actually get the opportunity to co-design from different experiences, from different backgrounds. And it's a beautiful way of changing the narratives of who tells the stories and what stories are told. I also recommend reading this publication, written by Kamal Sinclair. It's about how can you start to bring other narratives into the work that we're doing, especially in this digital age. We need to change the way that we tell these stories. And actually, this is a project I'm working on with Friends of the Earth. In the introduction, they said that I'm an artist and I'm a futurist and all of these things. What I'm doing with them is looking at how can we deconstruct this idea of what technology is. Rather than seeing virtual reality as just something through a headset, what are the underlying principles of virtual reality? A virtual environment, immersion, interactivity, and a sensory feedback. I'm using that concept to help us try and understand how to create an immersive experience for locals in London that help them have a visceral relationship with the narrative. That's why I'm asking you to really think differently about how you look at artificial intelligence and all other forms of technology, that they are interconnected relationships. Another suggestion comes from Dr. Al-Mubayed, who says that, and we heard it earlier, that we need to have this idea of what is fairness. You know, that organizations are looking and bringing and building these fairness groups internally. What she suggests is we actually bring that outside. And we have fairness groups that are transdisciplinary, different organizations, different cultures, different companies coming together to really try and understand what is fairness. How do we start to have these conversations? Because if you're just in one company making decisions, how does that, we end up with so many different ways of measuring things. Look, the past few years have really told us that what we believed was normal is broken. The pandemic, we realized that a lot of it was actually a lie. And so we have the opportunity now, in the words of Buckminster Fuller, you can't change things by doing this more of the same. We need to break the model. We have an opportunity, I really believe that we are in a historical inflection point where we can change that. So, how do we do this? As I come to the end of this talk, I wanted to share a few points that we can address this. We need to really think about this concept of artificial intelligence as a type of living system, this interconnected, it's already integrated into many of the things that we do, whether we know that or not. We need to think about how we bring these relationships together and that we need to embrace this idea that technology is really about a relational ecology. It's about creating relationships. It's not just about the hardware or the code. That's what technology is. That's what artificial intelligence is. So we need to think of it, start thinking of it as a relational ecology. That means that we start to stop thinking in binaries. We think about whose story are we telling, where do we get the information, and this link between artificial ancestral intelligence and where we're trying to take people on this journey. And it reminds me of this quote, which is, "We don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children." Think about that. The stuff that we are doing now, we are borrowing from the future. And still we're saying that we're going to build more technology that's going to do great things to change things. We're not really taking responsibility for the fact that whilst we're building all these things to try and change the world, we've all been a bit shit. We haven't changed our behaviour. Nothing is going to change if we don't change our behaviour. And so, in conclusion, if there is one thing I really want you to take away from this talk, from today, is this question. What type of ancestor do you want to be? Thank you.